What the Bible says is that God has revealed himself to all persons at all times in history through two mechanisms. One is through nature, and the other is through conscience. Through nature, we can see the handiwork of the Creator around us, like the fingerprints of an artist in his painting. And through conscience, God has implanted his moral law upon our hearts so that we can know the difference between right and wrong and know that we need his forgiveness. So, for example, people wholly apart from biblical revelation, people like Aristotle, for example, or if you read Native American poetry, spirituality, prior to the advent of the white man to this continent, you see remarkable belief in the Great Spirit or in God or the unmoved mover, and of our sense of moral value and our responsibility for living a virtuous life and so forth. This is called God's general revelation, and that general revelation has been made known for all of history as long as humanity's existed. And those who have only God's general revelation, the Bible says, won't be judged on the same basis as those who have his special revelation, which would be his revelation to Israel, and then through, ultimately, Jesus of Nazareth. So God is fair and will judge people based upon their response to the information that they have. So no one is lost. No one misses heaven, so to speak, due to the accidents of geography and history. Christianity shares many doctrines with other religions, particularly with regard to the existence of God. The great monotheistic faiths like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all share belief in the idea of a personal creator and designer of the universe who is the source of moral value and who holds us responsible. But the reason I believe that Christian theism in particular is true is because of Jesus of Nazareth. I think that we have very good historical grounds for thinking that this man claimed to be the absolute revelation of God and Son of God, and that, remarkably, God raised him from the dead in attestation of these radical, blasphemous, allegedly blasphemous claims for which he was crucified. Now, I know at first blush that sounds crazy. I mean, what historical evidence could there be for an event like Jesus' resurrection? But this was the subject of my doctoral research, my doctoral dissertation in Germany at the University of Munich. And what I found is that the central facts undergirding an inference to the resurrection of Jesus are accepted by the wide majority of New Testament historians today. And these would include things like Jesus' crucifixion at the hands of the Roman authorities in Jerusalem, his burial in a tomb by a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. We even know his name, Joseph of Arimathea. The discovery of that tomb being empty on the first day of the following week by a group of Jesus' women followers. Then various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death. And then finally, the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. And those 5 facts are agreed upon by the majority of historical scholars who write on the subject of the historical Jesus. And the question then is, well, how do you explain these? What's the best explanation? And I'm persuaded that the best explanation is the one that the original disciples gave. God raised him from the dead. And therefore, I believe that he was who he claimed to be, and therefore that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth is the true God. Well, the Bible teaches that God foreknows everything that happens. The New Testament has a whole vocabulary of Greek words with the prefix pro, P-R-O, like prognosos, for knowledge, pro-martureo, for tell, praorizo, for ordain. So the New Testament clearly teaches that God has foreknowledge of all these things that are going to happen. Now, the fatalist says that if God foreknows what you're going to do, then when the time arrives for you to do it, you're not free to do anything else because God cannot be mistaken. And since he has believed from eternity that you're going to do it, that means you're fated to do it. It seems to me, however, that the argument for logical or theological fatalism commits a fallacy in modal logic. This is the logic of necessity and possibility. The fatalist reasons like this: necessarily, if God foreknows X, then X will happen. 2, God foreknows X. 3, therefore, necessarily, X will happen. So, premise 1, necessarily, if God foreknows X, then X will happen. 2, God foreknows X. 3, therefore, necessarily, X will happen. And if X happens necessarily, it means it's not free. That commits a logical fallacy. From the 2 premises, you cannot deduce that necessarily X will happen. All that follows is simply X will happen, but not necessarily. It could fail to happen. But if it were to fail to happen, then God would have foreknown something different. So by your actions, you have the ability, by what you do, in a sense, to determine what God will have believed in the past. His knowledge is sort of like an infallible barometer of the weather. The barometer never fails. It's always right. But clearly, the barometer doesn't determine the weather. If the weather were different, the barometer would have been different. So the foreknowledge of God is like an infallible barometer, and you're free to do whatever you want, but you're just not free to fool the barometer. God knows whatever it is you do. So your action is logically prior to what God foreknows, but his foreknowledge is chronologically prior to what you do.
That was great. Thank you.
Sure.